A very warm good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our first exclusive panel discussion on removing unconscious bias in hiring. My name is Riddhima. I am currently working as Channel Development Manager at RChilli organization, and I'm so happy to be moderating this super exciting topic for today. Today, we are here to explore this critical topic on how it impacts diversity inclusion within organization. Unconscious bias influence decisions leading to potential discrimination and a less diverse workforce. Today, we have a panel who have an experience of more than 20 years into this industry. They're actually at the forefront of promoting fair and inclusive hiring practices. Let me take a moment to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. First, we have Josh Adam, currently working as Director of ERP Operations. He has a knowledge in ERP operation and has been an instrumental in developing innovative solutions for human resource. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
Second panelist, we have Ms. Laura Claus. She's working as co-founder and chief business development officer at Included.ai. She's the driving force behind Included AI. It helps HR and TA leaders to 10x their people analytics effort at a fraction of seconds. Her expertise in business development and diversity initiative has contributed significantly to creating a more inclusive workplace. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, nice to be here.
Our third panelist, Joanna Driver. She is working as Chief Human Resource Officer at Exabin. Her extensive experience in human resource and talent management have been a pivotal in shaping Exabin's workforce and culture. As a prominent cybersecurity company, Exabin recognizes the importance of diverse perspectives in creating a safer digital world. Welcome, Gianna.
Thanks, Riddhima. Happy to be here.
Last but not the least, we have Mr. Lovepreet Dhalawal, working as President Sales at RChilli organization. He brings with him a unique blend of leadership and sales expertise to our panel. Through RChilli's state of hiring solutions, Lovepreet has been an advocate for neutralizing bias in the recruitment process, ensuring that organizations attract best talent based on skills and potential. Welcome, Lovepreet.
Thank you, Riddhima. Glad to be here.
So without further ado, let's start. And I'm so happy to be asking this first question, which is there in our, all of us. What exactly is unconscious bias and how does it manifest in the hiring process? We can start with you, Laura.
With all of these awesome co-panelists. Unconscious bias is a bias that has to do with our unconscious beliefs around who is an awesome candidate, who is not an awesome candidate, based on attributes that have nothing to do with the job, right? It might look like their age, their geographic location, their race, their gender. These are some of the most commonly touched upon attributes that unconscious bias refers to, but there are many more, including abilities, neurodiversity aspects, whether or not someone is pregnant, whether or not someone is a parent. There's a variety of ways in which we might look at a candidate or an employee and assign things that are not true to them based on our own misconceptions. We might say, well, if this person is pregnant, they will not work hard at this job. That would be an example of unconscious bias, right? We have no proof, and in fact, there's proof to the contrary. And so in that case, what we're seeing is the importance of understanding how our sort of background music in the back of our head can change our choices and our actions and our execution and change opportunities and outcomes for individuals who are going through a hiring process.
Would you like to add more, Josh?
It's hard to argue with everything Laura just said because that's absolutely true. I take it, when I look at it, I go adding on a few extra pieces, which goes, most people would look at me and be like, why? But then at the same time, you get it after I explain it. And that is things just like resume format. The way their resume looks, if they didn't hit spell check on something. If, for me, one of the worst ones is you go through and it's not just, what companies they worked at, what schools they went to, male, female, etc. It could be something just as simple as a name. because you associate certain names with, everybody does this, with people they went to school with, grew up with, childhood. And so being able, for unconscious bias, being able to really get down to the root of the issue, which is full skills-based hiring without any outside influence, that's, to me, the most important aspect. But being able to effectively hide/blind the recruiter/hiring manager from all those other pieces, that's the challenge.
What are your thoughts on it, China?
Yeah, so thanks, Ridhima. What I would add to what Laura and Josh mentioned is unconscious bias can manifest itself in ways that are advantageous to candidates or not advantageous to candidates, right? And so, as they mentioned, it could be basing quick judgments off of names, gender, is someone a parent, like all of those things are true. And I think it manifests itself in the hiring process, we know, because sometimes what will happen is, let's say, men and women. We know scientifically that a lot of times interviewers and hiring managers, as part of their recruitment process, may look at men and think of not just their experiences, but also their potential to do a job well. And we know from science that unconsciously, a lot of times what may happen is when those same folks are interviewing female candidates, they look less at potential and more off of experience. And so what may happen is unconsciously, we might then evaluate men based off of their potential to do great things in our organization, versus we may look at women as, oh, they don't have X, Y, and Z experiences, and therefore they're not as qualified as their male counterpart that in blind studies is just as qualified on paper. So unconscious bias can manifest itself in a number of different ways in the hiring process, and it behooves us as leaders and hiring managers to be as diligent as possible to make sure that we're aware of the unconscious biases that all of us have, because we're human.
Lovepreet, you want to add on something?
Yeah, excellent points by the panelists. So, like the word says, unconscious bias. So it's bias that we may or may not be aware of, right? As human beings, we have a tendency to classify things, organize things, and that's also true with people. When we meet someone, we want to relate to them. We try to find some common grounds to either relate with them, or based on our preconceived notions, we find something that we don't like about them, and then we put them into that category. So we would like to think that we are better judges than that, but again, as the term says, it's unconscious. It happens without us even noticing. Someone's performed well at job A, we might have a tendency to automatically assume they'll be good at job B and C as well. And the vice versa, if someone's done poorly at a past job, they've not met the quota, we might have a tendency to assume they might not be well suited for this job as well. So there are a lot of factors that go into unconscious bias, age, gender, lots of other metrics. But what's important to realize is the whole idea behind removing this bias is to ensure equality of opportunity, right? The person should have the best opportunity to at least apply and get through the hiring process without having any of these factors influence the hiring manager's decision. And I think if we can do that, that would be the best way forward.
Which brings me now to the second question. What are the potential consequences of bias in hiring, both for individuals and organizations? So let's start with you, Lovepreet.
Sure. So for individuals, it's pretty obvious. You don't want to cut out people just because they belong to a certain demographic, right? You want to assess and evaluate people based on their competence and merit. So that's the first, I think, fundamental principle. If we can help candidates to, put forward their merit, put forward their skills, and then help them to, fulfill that potential while on the job, I think that would benefit the candidate. Because otherwise, they would miss out on a job that would potentially be their dream job, and they can excel at it. And from the, organization side, you don't want to thin the top of the funnel so much that you miss out on quality talent, just because you have so many filters in place which may or may not even be relevant to the job that you're trying to hire for. So I think it's a win-win or a lose-lose situation. The candidate loses out on a potential good job that they could excel at and also grow themselves and help the company. And the company loses out on valuable assets which could have otherwise helped the company grow. So a diverse workforce without the need for filters and shortlisting, which is based on unconscious metrics, I think that needs to be done away with, and people should be hired on merit alone.
That's a new perspective, hiring people on merits. So what do you think, Josh, can be done?
When you look at the consequences of bias in hiring, there are many. I mean, that's one of the reasons why here in the US we have, so many different laws around equal opportunity employment, why we have, a number of different processes to ensure that we are being as inclusive as possible for everybody in the workforce. The hardest part about getting rid of that bias, beyond, the legal or the going back to the consequences, is that technology or the effort in place to ensure that those making the final, those actually making or involved in the decisions are able to do so without bias. That the consequences are there's a lot of setup that goes into place. There are some technologies that can help, but when you think about, take company A, they have recruiters. Those recruiters will go through, they'll get a bunch of candidates for a position. They'll then shortlist, run a search, whether it's based on skills, job title, etc. But at that point, if they're trying to shortlist those candidates, if they're just doing it based on skills, fine. But some of that bias still falls into place because now those shortlists show candidate name, etc. So getting everything into place that allows for unbiased hiring does take effort, and it is, if we're looking at what it takes for organizations and such, it's that desire to want to change.
Would you like to add something, Laura, to this? Because this is a very deep discussion that we are having today.
Right. Well, listen, bias is not simply a one-to-one situation that is enacted from one person against another. It is, very much a structural element inside our economic systems, our legal systems, and our social systems as well. And so I know Lovepreet, I think you said you were in Canada, Reedma, you're in India, and Jana, you're in the UK, and I'm here in the United States with Josh. And all of these countries show the legacy of structural bias, right? So when we talk about the impact on an individual, what we're seeing is entire classes, entire cohorts, which are completely boxed out of legacy, intergenerational wealth transfer, opportunity, access, right? So we want to be careful not to just keep it at a one-to-one level, although obviously that's part of the conversation. So when we talk about an individual, it is an individual who's being boxed out of an environment, but they belong to a much larger cohort. And in every country, we're able to see the legacy, the impact of what that really looks like when it's a structural experience. Now, when it comes to companies, it's really interesting. So, I obviously have founded a software company that uses, artificial intelligence and ML in order to assist with diversity hiring and also with all DEI solutions for the HR suite. And fundamentally, what we're talking about there is the narrowing of the talent pool for companies that absolutely need to stay competitive. There's a reason that Fortune 500 companies have wholeheartedly embraced diversity hiring, and it's not because it's a fad, right? In fact, there is absolutely a competition on the employer side for top quality talent, right? And there has been a breakthrough in understanding, breaking centuries of bias against entire populations, such as pregnant women, such as the disabled population, such as the LGBTQIA population, such as, Black and brown folks in the United States, Southeast Asian, so forth and so on. Per country, it varies. Older workers saying, oh my gosh, we have boxed out untold, millions of people from the talent pool and narrowed it down to the smallest possible cohorts of identities, and at what cost to our ability to dominate in our field, right? And so we've got massive structural impacts that we can trace back to individual actions, of course, that we can see on both the employer and the candidate side.
Afri, do you want to add on something to this?
Well, I agree in part that, there is a structural, part to this. And in hiring specifically, if we talk about it, the best we can do is to ensure that no matter who it is, what group they are from or what they believe in, they should have the best opportunity or equal opportunity to at least apply and be considered for that position. I think that's step number one. And to do that, it's each organization's duty to have directives in place and a top-down policy that ensures, hey, this is our stand on diversity, equity, inclusion. These are our policies. This is how we're going to ensure that anyone that gets added to our recruitment process ends up with a job and gets analyzed and shortlisted based on so-and-so metrics. And those metrics needs to be visible company-wide so that everyone knows what someone is being shortlisted on. And these biases that have crept in aren't there anymore. I think that's the best we can hope for. Being more visible and vocal about what it is that your organization is doing, what sort of directives do you have in place to ensure that biases aren't or what they're influencing the hiring decisions.
I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of new perspectives about hiring and how it is changing. So Gianna, would you like to add on something?
Yeah. So when I think about the potential consequences of bias in the hiring process, I think about we all work at organizations, whether they are big or small, and we have a mission, and that mission typically entails some type of revenue or profits. And I think about the best decisions come when we have diversity of thought. If we are unconsciously biased in our hiring process, that usually means that we are going to gravitate toward hiring people who think like us, who have the same backgrounds as us, the same life experiences as us, which ultimately nets out to mean that we're going to be making suboptimal decisions because we will not be as innovative as we could be if we had people who thought differently, who had different perspectives and opinions and views to bring, to brainstorms and ideation sessions. And so when I think about the potential consequences of being unconsciously biased, I think it leads to poor business outcomes. It leads to groupthink. It leads to, profits that are not nearly as big and strong and sustainable as they would be otherwise. So this is, being thoughtful and aware of unconscious biases and doing everything we can to mitigate unconscious biases in the hiring process, I would argue is essential to business success.
Could you please share some of the strategies and techniques that can be used to migrate unconscious bias in the hiring process from your end and that you're doing into the organization as well?
Things that we've done here at Exabeam that I think have worked well is we believe it begins with awareness. So we spend a lot of time and energy on training our employees, our hiring managers, folks who were involved in the interview process, and just all employees, regardless of being a manager or not, about unconscious biases. Because the reality is, the amygdala part of our brains are what trigger fight or flight. So it's impossible to be human and to not have some type of unconscious bias, because that's what's kept us alive through many, many generations. So what we strive to do is make people aware of different types of unconscious bias, to add language around unconscious biases and all of the ways that this can manifest and show up. It could be recency bias, it could be proximity bias, it could be gender bias, it could be ethnic bias, it could be body size bias. Biases show up in many, many different ways. And so we need to be aware of them and then have a toolkit of strategies that we can do to then mitigate their effects on our decision-making processes. As it pertains to the hiring process specifically, we try to look at data and trends to make hiring managers and leaders aware of the decisions that they're making, which is interesting because I think in aggregate, data can start to show and tell a very interesting story that the individual hiring manager or leader might not be aware of on a day-to-day basis. An example of this might mean showing a hiring manager that over the last 2 or 3 months that we've had this role open, do you realize like we've presented, let's just say 50 female candidates and 50 male candidates. Hiring manager, you've said no to 48 of the female candidates and only said, I want to move two women forward in the process. And, you've said yes to 30 of that. I'm making numbers up right now to prove a point, but that's where data can be really, really helpful. Some other techniques and strategies might also mean when recruiters are going through the screening process to look at blind resumes. So instead of looking at names or looking at schools or things like that, looking instead at competencies, looking instead at more of these objective metrics to understand, can someone do this job or do they have the potential to do this job? Thankfully, we live in a world where there are lots of solutions from a tech perspective that can enable some of these decisions to be made in a faster and quicker way. And there are tools that scrub LinkedIn as an example and can help recruiters and hiring managers assess and look at resumes in a more blind fashion, which I think is fabulous, and it's something we're pretty excited about.
Awesome. I think Laura has been writing a lot about these strategies. So would you like to share some?
I was just taking notes. I agree with everything Gianna said, and it's a really welcome perspective to have an HR executive in the conversation, really speaking about strategies that work on the ground, right? It's one thing to talk about this in abstract. It's another thing to reflect about that lived executive experience. So thank you for that. When I first joined the DEI space in the 1990s, the effort was simply to get widespread consensus that structural implications were at play, right? That incidents of biases, were not one-off experiences. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't, one hiring manager making one bias decision, but to prove out that there were structural issues. And in order to get a broader consensus socially that there were structural issues at play that we needed to muster all of our effort to address, we developed programmatic aspects that could help carry the conversation. And those programmatic aspects actually, in the United States at least, have their roots back to the 1960s. And so inside the private sector, we've seen in the past several decades, beautiful programmatic efforts, very hard work, lots of elbow grease, lots of blood, sweat, and tears to build a consensus, to build enough of an analysis that people like us on this conversation can say, oh yeah, of course it's a structural issue. Of course. Now, what can we do about it? The fact that we can hop like that intellectually is awesome, and we are doing wonderfully. And inside the private sector, the next phase of what we can do besides programmatic elements, besides studying, thinking, talking, training, right, becomes measuring and creating transparency. And Gianna spoke to that very beautifully. We need data in order to help prove out and create transparency. This is happening, and this is how it's happening, right? Now it's 2023. So the question then becomes, how do we do this at scale, right? What's possible with ML and AI? How can we take our programmatic, robust programmatic elements, which are widely understood and very challenging to execute, but being done beautifully? How can we pair those with transparency and data-driven decisions at scale, right? And it's a delicious problem. It's an exciting problem that we get to scale opportunity like this. And so what we're looking at is the ability to treat the candidate with the kind of obsession that we treat the customer, right? With customers, revenue drivers, we know everything about their journey in real time. In fact, at this point with AI, ML, and big data solutions, we can predict what a customer is going to do before they even do it, right? And so what we're now able to do with HR and people data is forecast that with that same level of accuracy. right? Both the internal stakeholders as well as the candidate population as well. And that's part of the solution that I've brought to market, is to really figure out, how do we get this into the hands of HR? Isn't it time that the same software capabilities we have to drive revenue are being applied to the solution of diversity recruiting, right? What does it mean to send real-time notifications that a trend is emerging within certain job family or certain population of candidates? Like, the whole ecosystem of touch points, both internal and external stakeholders, is available for us to treat as though they were customers. And so for me, it's really about augmenting the technology side of the conversation while praising and valuing the programmatic side, which has become so robust.
That's a lot to actually intake. I think Josh and Lovepreet will be like adding few more points to this.
I'm not going to add much on this because Gianna, Laura, by all means, stay off mute because I'd love your input on this. For me, when I sit there and look, based on what my, focus, my specialty is, I work with clients on ERP. My whole goal is make it, enhance the candidate experience, make it easy for them to get those candidates into whatever ERP solution that they're using. But more importantly, enhancing the recruiter experience, because now the recruiters can easily search, find the most relevant candidates, get them shortlisted. Now, for me, the technologies that I look at in play is just, from everything that Gianna, both you and Laura said, it's step one. It's literally, okay, now how can we take all of this, all this information, and at scale and with technology, blank it out and make it as unbiased as possible. What I'm working on with my clients is each and every one of them. Candidate uploads their resume. Not only are we populating all the various fields of information into database, but we also give them the opportunity to say, hey, okay, let's take this resume. Now let's templatize it. So every candidate resume follows the exact same template. So there is no longer any visual difference between candidate A, candidate B, candidate C. Plus, not only is it templatized, but we're also redacting / anonymizing, removing name, contact information, schools, depending on what each company wants, what each client wants. Imagine taking a resume and say, okay, for every resume, we don't want school names showing. We don't even want dates on, we just want to see what their degree was. We don't want to know when it happened or any of that. We don't want to know what companies they worked for. So they're trying to blank out as much information so that whenever they're looking at it, every candidate has the exact same formatted, templatized resume with just the pertinent information. For me, the hardest part about that is I can do that part all day long. It's what both of you said. Now, what do you do with it? Gianna, what do you do on the HR side? Laura, how do we, I can get all that information there. How do we scale it? How do we take that information even further, allowing for that, for scalability and ensuring that we're trying to remove it, as much bias as possible. I look at this simply as, for me, the only piece I can answer is step one. I can give you completely unbiased information. That's it. But when I look at the rest of it, it's like, holy crap, there's so many other things behind it that both of you have just laid on. And it's like, yeah, if I really want to get further into that, that's going to be a problem, because all my experience is on step one. Then what each company does is up to them and what their processes, have evolved to over the years.
We will give chance to everyone who wants to ask questions at the end of the session. So hold on and write your questions in the Q&A box. And we will also give you an opportunity to speak if you want to. So Lovepreet, you want to add something, or should I move to my next question?
Excellent points by everyone. I think it's pretty much covered. It starts with having your organization-wide directives in place. Awareness is key, and making sure there's a structure, standard operating procedure, if you will, and that whenever someone applies, they're shortlisted, they're interviewed, they're selected. It's it's the same process for every applicant, no matter the background they're from, or any of these other variable metrics. So if you ask the same set of, qualifying questions to each applicant, then you take away the variance, you take away the subjective nature of an interview. I think that's the best way forward. And that's what we do here at RChilli, right? We take the resume data, we take the job data, we help you to anonymize it, redact the information that may not be relevant to your hiring decisions, so that resume and job data can then be fed into your business processes, and your directives take over after that.
Well, next question I had is talking about technology. How can it be used to reduce the unconscious bias in hiring? Talking about each organization that we hold on. So we can start with you, Lafri.
I think I answered that in part. We at RChilli ensure our part of it by the redaction that we do during processing of resumes when we enable the search and match engine for you. So we give you full transparency on what a match is based on, why someone has scored 90%, why someone else has scored, let's say 20% when compared against the job. What are those metrics? Giving the hire manager full control on adjusting those weights that make up that score behind the scenes. So again, it comes back to awareness and visibility. As long as we're aware that such things exist, that we're doing them unconsciously, and we have visibility in what we can do to change that, we have control, we have standard processes in place that help us in tackling those. I think that's the best we can do, and technology allows you to do that at RChilli. So we process large amounts of data, I think 1 billion documents a year, and our job is to structure them for you, redact the information that you don't want to see in your database, and then you can feed it into your existing processes.
Diana, how your organization is working on building that?
Yeah, so I think we've talked a little bit already about technology and how that can be leveraged, right, to reduce unconscious bias in hiring. Some additional ideas and things that we've had success with includes job descriptions themselves can be written in ways unconsciously that bias toward or against certain employee demographics. And there's wonderful technology out there that actually goes through and combs job descriptions so that the languaging in a job description is more inclusive and appeals to a broader array and audience of candidates. I think, the actual interviewing process should be one where inclusivity and diversity is embraced. As an example, having candidates come through and virtually meet an interview panel that's all of the same type of person, be that the same gender, the same race, the same, basically kind of cut and pasted from the same cloth, that's probably not going to appeal to a wide and diverse population of candidates. So things like that, like thinking through, okay, in the assessments, we have an ATS, an applicant tracking system, where interviewers post-interview go in and write up their notes and they're asked questions. We try to make sure that the questions that we're asking are really thought-provoking and get to the heart of competencies and potential. So we get away from personality or things like that are very, very subjective and prone to bias. We try to make sure that we are consistently evaluating candidates in a similar fashion. And in fact, in our interview training that we do for folks across the company, we try to be clear around these ways of thinking and evaluating and assessing candidates are good. These are not good. This is what we don't do. It's similar to how we train interviewers on the subsets of questions that we can and can't ask. It's also important that we train folks in how to evaluate talent as it comes through the pipeline.
Laura?
It's a great question, right? How can tech be used to mitigate bias? So, at the origin of tech use for diversity hiring, what we saw was the digitization of programmatic behaviors. Sort of like the entire first class of what we would refer to now as DEI tech. So that might be sort of, making sure that there was an automated diversity survey sent to a candidate so that they felt included. So it's sort of automations and digitization of things that we were doing manually. We're going to do it, but now we're going to do it digital. And sort of the next step up from that is to use the capabilities of ML and AI and, big data architecture to look at the entire span of the candidate's experience from first point of contact with the company, whether they come in or we source them, right, to offer rejection or being washed out of the funnel. And along that path, right, there are things like some companies do use, redacted resumes in the way that RChilli is talking about. Some companies do use diversity slates, so wanting to make sure that a slate of candidates coming before an interview panel has, X percentage of historically underrepresented identities. Some companies use diverse panels themselves of interviewers, like Gianna was talking about, to make sure that the candidate sees themselves inside the company. There's a variety of ways in which companies are using tactics, right? But we want to unify them. We want to streamline that process. We want to start to add in our own workforce KPIs. What is our expectation of ourselves? So one of Included's customers, Included being my company, BarkBox in the United States, they send doggy treats in the mail. I love BarkBox. My dog eats those treats regularly. Fluffy little toys, eats the toys too. And they were able, in 2 quarters of using our platform, to increase their offers to women by 30%. Now, how is that possible? The argument here is that in the case of BarkBox and many companies who are doing everything right, BarkBox is known for its diversity stance, right? It's low-hanging fruit. So much is lost in the churn if we're digitizing just one component or another, and we're not unifying the view, and we're not having instant visibility into exactly where the leaky faucet is for different demographics. And we're not using AI like we do with the revenue side of the house to predict what's likely to happen based on our historical and contemporary data unified and mapped out. So what our platform is able to do, and I can't help but mention it because it's designed against your question, is to look at what is the recruiter doing, how can we take the work off of their plate to digitize that behavior, and then to read the demographics of everyone coming into the funnel to alert the recruiters, hey, you're drinking from a fire hose. You had 1,000 people in this market apply for one job. And we're just going to let you know that even though we're 7 days into the role, right, 7 women just applied, or a high percentage of people of color are languishing at the screening stage, right? So that the recruiter is able to know and take action wherever the leaky faucet is. We're also able to predict the likelihood of a diverse hire per open role, so the recruiter can prioritize their work stack and say, well, gosh, I'm going to focus on this family of jobs because they're all in the red, right? So what we're able to do with ML and AI is take rules to measure, are we meeting them? Are we on track? Are we off trend, right? And with AI, we're able to do predictions and forecasts. And then the final aspect is that automation and delivery of support to the people doing the role so they can get into a proactive stance and get on their toes. Say, let me go get it. Let me reprioritize. Let me go take action here, right? And so we're seeing incredible outcomes at the end of the funnel.
Josh, you would like to add something?
I can't follow that. Like I said, for me, it's step 1. Based on what Gianna and Laura have both gone over, no, for me, my focus is step 1. Get them that information in place. Now, Laura's got the solution to really get you that information. Gianna has to know how to deliver it, with her company. So nothing else for me to add.
We are actually running short on time, so just one more question, then we are going to take questions from audience. We already have received few of them. So how do you ensure that diversity and inclusion efforts go beyond hiring and are integrated into the overall company culture? So we begin with you, Josh, now.
If you're to ask me, my expertise on that is ensuring that people know the technologies are out there. The hardest part about making sure that goes into the overall company culture is to get the buy-in from the leadership at these companies. And I mean, Laura, how often are you going through and getting buy-in from leadership at the organizations that you work with? They have to know that there's an issue. They have to understand that this is a problem or a concern that they want to address. My focus on it, I focus on a very small piece of it. But like anything, it's all about awareness to the appropriate individuals that can actually help push those decisions through. Because changing 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of how people have been doing business, changing behaviors, not easy.
Takes a lot of time to inculcate new things. Gianna, what is your take on that?
Yeah, so we've focused a lot of our conversation today on being more inclusive and reducing unconscious bias as it pertains to the hiring process, which is very important. But I think it's also important to look at how organizations are overall being intentional about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, right? So, step one is making sure we're conscious to try to get underrepresented minorities and diverse folks in the door. But step two is making sure they have a strong sense of belonging and that they can thrive in our organization. And so to that end, there are a number of things that I think organizations can do to be very thoughtful about being inclusive. So, some of these things include in the performance review process and the promotion process, looking at the data. And this is where technology comes in really handy, and looking at, okay, on average, females, males, you can break this up into ethnic groups, you can do this in many different ways, comprise X% of the entire population, but maybe they are a disproportionately high portion of the folks who are being promoted. Or let's look at the annual merit increases. How much are we distributing across the workforce, and are we doing that equitably and according to true merit? Or does unconscious bias start to creep into our decision-making processes? And this is where having the languaging and the knowledge to name the unconscious bias and to be aware of it is the first step in this process, so that we can all talk about the same thing and understand one another. There are things that we've done here at Exabeam that have been really helpful. So as an example, we've created ERGs, employee resource groups, which are ways for people who have similarities or the same passions or backgrounds or experiences can join and find community. We've found that it promotes psychological safety. It helps people feel that they are wanted and welcome in the organization. We look at, we regularly are looking at our data around people analytics. So as an example, we look at things like attrition, but we go a couple steps deeper using technology to dive into, okay, are we losing at a disproportionately high rate folks who are part of this ethnic group, or our LGBTQIA plus community, or whatever it might be, our veteran population, right? Because wherever things are, it looks like we have an anomaly, that's where we'll lean in and we'll start to understand, is it management practices? Is it unconscious bias? Do we have a workplace that's hospitable to a diversity of talent, right? And so, again, I want to emphasize that as we think about this, it's about understanding where we are and then working hard to become better. Nobody is perfect at this, and perfection's not the goal. The goal is for all of us to be aware and to work toward doing better. And that's where I'm so excited about some of the technology solutions out here, like Laura's and others. I think that's what we as HR practitioners need.
Lafpreet, you want to?
Yeah, I agree with everything Gianna says. It's about awareness and education, first and foremost, because unless we know what's happening, we won't even be able to take it to the management and explain the impact it's having. Because at least that's what I've seen. If you need something to be changed, find out its impact on the bottom line. So as long as the bottom line is being impacted, you'll see a change coming real fast in a company. And I think if that's what it takes, then let's do that, right? Find out what's happening, what are the processes, analyze it. And people analytics is the best way to start with. Question everything. Why is someone being shortlisted? Why isn't a group being shortlisted, right? Are they being hindered by some sort of processes we have in place, right? It's only when we question everything is when we can really get down to the root of it and decide to, how do we go about solving it? And I think that's the core of it. Have your processes in place, make sure it's linked to the bottom line so the company knows what's in it for them to ensure, our efforts on diversity, equity, inclusion are in line, with what's right for the applicant. And then question everything at each step of the way. And technology is a big part of it. Use tech to give you those, information and data points that you can build your analytics on top of. And then you just hope to do better than you were yesterday.
Laura, what are your final notes on this?
I really love how Gianna ended her very sage and salient points by saying, hopefully tech like what Laura and her team have brought to market can help with HR execs who are leading the charge. And I also really love how Lovepreet was emphasizing question everything. So now let's put these two things together and talk about a day in the life of a VP of HR or a CHRO. What we have are business unit leaders. In our case, we studied a lot of chief technology officers and how they handle their relationship with HR. And yes, the motto is question everything. And Gianna, you don't have to talk about it in public, but we both know what that experience is of putting all the data points together, right? And coming up with the presentation and the guidance and the wisdom in order to drive DEI within HR. And then to have the chief technology officer say more data, drill down deeper, and to book a follow-up meeting, and then to have to pull additional reports. And, the crisis with DEI has been more recently that people believe it to be slow and arduous, right? And so it goes to the wayside because it's harder to attach it to financial outcomes. And then we have stakeholders saying more information, prove it harder, prove it more, another meeting, another report. And the memo here from me and from Team Included is it doesn't have to be that way, right? Our number one selling module is instant scorecards for every business unit leader and every scheduled report with real-time and predictive analytics embedded in, and DEI is embedded in every view, and everything is drill downable. So what we're looking at is a landscape now where every leader has their custom view. Every report is instant and automated that's needed. And then we can drill down in real time. So when a CTO type persona or head of revenue or any other business unit leader says, prove it, prove it, prove it, with the technology we have available now, you can literally just click in real time until we get to the 5 employees or the 100 or the 1,000 who are impacted by this question mark. We can scale all the way out and we can scale all the way in, right? And it's logical that this would be possible because it's already happening on the revenue side of the house. No one has done the work to bring that to HR in real time, one unified set of HR data that's drillable and embedded with DEI. And it's really just a question of there having been an appetite for it. And now with leaders like Gianna and, questioning minds like Lovepreet, the appetite is really there.
This brings me down to the end of this session because we have actually extended the time today. Thank you so much, Gianna, Laura, Josh, and Lovepreet for this fruitful discussion. A lot of new perspectives added. I think we can just include that into our organizations.
Ridhima, thank you very much for putting this webinar together. I thought there was a lot of great information. The amount I learned.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I hope that the listeners were able to glean some useful bits of information around reducing unconscious bias in the hiring process. And I would end by saying we're in this together, and remember that it is a journey. It's not a destination. And so, in the spirit of learning and all getting better together, I'm very, very excited and grateful to have been a part of today's conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to represent Team Included. Thank you so much to Josh, Lovepreet, and Gianna. Ridhima, thank you so much for organizing the panel. Even 3 years ago, the desire and the willingness to discuss applications for AI in this space was very low, and the terror level was extremely high. And the change that I've personally witnessed in the last 36 months alone really just blows my mind. And, when we look back, spanning to the origins of how structural oppression got set up, I just really want to echo what Gianna said. It's a journey, and we're on it together. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Gianna. Thank you, Laura. Love to hear your thoughts. Thank you, Josh, and Rhythm, especially for organizing this. And thank you for everyone who came out to hear us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.